While grunge was fading, behind the scenes, new music genres were being developed and prepared to take its place. Some would do better than others. However, they all had some common characteristics. The main thing was that they were offshoots of heavy metal, some closer, some less close to the original. Also, many of their historically best albums were released during the period we are examining. It was, for many of them, their golden age. Industrial metal had made a name in the rock universe with names like Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, and Godflesh during the previous era we examined. Ministry burned out quickly, and Godflesh were always a part of the underground. Nine Inch Nails triumphed with their 1994 album The Downward Spiral, which, although it had heavy moments, was more widely perceived by the public as an alternative album. So the baton will be taken up by the Californian band Fear Factory with their awesome Demanufacture, as well as former groove metalers White Zombie with Astro Creep 2000, both of 1995. The former will continue to give us significant releases for many years, while the latter will disband and will practically be replaced by Rob Zombie's personal band. Mention should also be made of Static X, who emerged towards the end of the decade. Now, if we want to talk about the most impactful names in this style, in terms of the mark they left on the pop culture of the time, we have to mention Marilyn Manson, who became the new bogeyman of the good American society in a situation reminiscent of the 1980s witch hunts, and of course the German band Rammstein, who made the bold choice to sing in German, which worked 100% in their favor, both through a series of strong releases as well as their amazing live shows. They have managed to remain a big name in rock music to this day, 30 years after their first big breakthrough. Since we're in Germany, let's also talk about a musical genre that was invented, matured, and flourished there. I'm talking about power metal, of course. The releases by Running Wild, Rage, and Helloween, despite their ups and downs, kept it alive during the dominance of grunge, until two landmark albums of 1995 took it to new heights. I'm talking about Blind Guardian's Imaginations from the Other Side and Gamma Ray's Land of the Free. From then on, new names began to pop up like mushrooms, widening the scope of the genre and taking it outside of Germany and mainland Europe. Sonata Arctica, Angra, Camelot, Stratovarius, Rhapsody, Avantasia, Edguy, Hammerfall, and many others. These bands created an excellent legacy that continues to fuel the style to this day. Let's move on to progressive metal now. There, Queensryche and Fates Warning continued to be a significant presence, with the former even achieving unexpected global success. However, the band that put the genre on the map, the one for whom the term progressive metal was coined, was the New York-based Dream Theater, with the series of excellent albums they gave us throughout the 90s, starting with Images and Words in 1992. During the period we are presenting here, other similar American bands appeared, such as Symphony X, Shadow Gallery, Psychotic Waltz, and Nevermore. All of them found greater acceptance outside of their homeland. Sweden would also prove to be a steady supplier of the genre, with names like Edge of Sanity, Pain of Salvation, and Evergrey. In the broader realm of progressive heavy rock, during the period we are examining, three names emerged that, in addition to achieving great success, left an indelible mark on the style. We begin with the Californian band Tool, who, although perhaps the most distant from the traditional metal sound, were appreciated by a large part of the heavy rock world, both for their original ideas as well as their exceptional technical skills. Secondly, the Swedish band Opeth, who dared to combine death metal vocals and aggression, with passages straight from the 1970s, gained a steadily increasing appeal that led to the triumphant success of the albums they released in the 2000s, particularly in America. And finally, the also Swedish band Meshuggah, who invented a completely different way to play thrash/death metal, focusing on things like polyrhythms, dissonance, odd time signatures, and extremely technical playing. When their style hit the mainstream with their 2008 album, Obscene, it had such an impact that a new subgenre was created, practically based solely on their sound. The continuous search for new, alternative heavy sounds in the preceding era brought a number of bands to the attention of the rock world and record labels. These bands combined the heavy psychedelia of the early 70s, the space rock of Hawkwind, and the primal metal of Black Sabbath. The name given to this sound was stoner rock, for the more restrained, and stoner metal, for the more violent of those bands. At the forefront of the genre were two American names, Kyuss from the California desert and Monster Magnet from New Jersey. The metal world realized something was happening when they saw familiar names following this style. I'm thinking of Corrosion of Conformity's Deliverance, the debut album by Pantera's Phil Anselmo's side project, Down, or the former death metalers Entombed, who also delved into this style. Then, names started appearing at a machine gun pace. Fu Manchu, Karma to Burn, Clutch, Unida, Spirit Caravan, High on Fire, Nebula, Goat Snake from America, Orange Goblin, Cathedral, Electric Wizard from England, Spiritual Beggars and Dozer from Sweden, and many, many others. My country also set foot on this style with the Great Night Stalker. The future would be bright for this genre, which would see its popularity skyrocket in the next decade. Gothic metal may have predated the era we are examining, but it was during this period that it truly broke through. Initially, two landmark bands of the genre released their Gothic masterpieces, Draconian Times by Paradise Lost, June 1995, and October Rust by Type O Negative, August 1996. Also, other great names of the genre started to emerge, such as My Dying Bride, Anathema, Tiamat, and newcomers, at the time, Moonspell. It was in the middle of the decade that the genre experienced its first major split. Until then, bands were consistently combining 80s gothic rock/post-punk with metal in various forms. But somewhere along the way, two European bands decided to try something new, to combine growling male vocals with clean female vocals. I'm talking about The Gathering from the Netherlands, only on their first album, and Theatre of Tragedy from Norway. A lot of similar artists followed, all of them initially categorized as gothic metal, although their sound soon evolved in various directions. At the same time, their success elevated the position of women in the metal scene, as various frontwomen became just as well known, if not more so, than their male counterparts. As a result, European record companies were signing every band they could find with a similar look and sound. This gave rise to many significant names of the genre, such as the Finnish Nightwish, the Italian Lacuna Coil, the Dutch After Forever, Within Temptation, and Epica, the Norwegian Tristania, and many others. However, the sound had moved miles away from the Gothic part of the term, so another one was invented: symphonic metal. In the decade that followed, many of these names, with Nightwish, Lacuna Coil, and Epica at the forefront, would achieve significant levels of success, literally all over the world. When Carcass were preparing to release Heartwork in 1993, their label Earache was very hesitant. They were afraid that their new sound would be seen by the hardcore death metal audience as the ultimate betrayal. Slower tempos, elements of traditional metal, melodic lines in the riffs and solos. What was all this stuff? In the end, nothing happened. The album was very well received, and in fact, 2 years later, a Swedish band took that sound and elevated it. I'm talking about At the Gates, of course, with their album Slaughter of the Soul, who will very soon be followed by two of their fellow compatriots, not just from Sweden, but from the same city, Gothenburg. I'm obviously referring to In Flames and Dark Tranquillity. The sound these three proposed was given the obvious name, the Gothenburg sound, and the most accepted melodic death metal. They were soon joined by three other Swedish bands, Arch Enemy, Soilwork, and Amon Amarth, as well as the Finnish band Children of Bodom. The genre experienced unexpected success, to the point of strongly influencing the metalcore style and, more generally, what was called new wave of American metal, which would emerge in the next decade. And we come to the big winner, the best-selling genre which had the strongest impact on pop culture and the greatest appeal to the youth of the time. Malicious people will say that this is also the style that left us the smallest legacy for the future, although that is a matter of debate. Of course, I am talking about nu metal. It was created by Korn's debut and self-titled album of 1994. It caught the audience's attention in 1996, when Korn's second album debuted at number 3 on the Billboard chart, and a band that was completely metal until then, Sepultura, tried playing in that style on their Roots album. It dominated the 5-year period from 1997 to 2001, clearly aided by the highly successful touring festival Ozfest. Musically, it was like someone took all the trends of the grunge era and shook them up in a giant shaker. Pantera, Faith No More, Rage Against the Machine, hip-hop, alternative or even pop melodies, even a little grunge, and you're in. Down-tuned guitars, Ross Robinson, emphasis on rhythm over technique, and the biggest sin for a traditional metalhead: no solos. The names that were placed in that style were many and diverse: Limp Bizkit, Cold Chamber, Papa Roach, P.O.D., Kitty, Sevendust, Mudvayne, Incubus, Snot, Orgy, Soulfly. Practically all Americans, a flurry of gold and platinum records, videos on MTV, covers on the rock press all over the world. No matter what your opinion is on that genre, there were some artists who stood out. Slipknot, who relied much more on thrash and death metal to build their sound; Linkin Park, who sounded the freshest and most interesting of all; Deftones, clearly the most eclectic, high-quality, musically innovative, and groundbreaking of the entire group; and System of a Down, who I practically think were put in this category simply because they didn't fit in anywhere else, as their Armenian Greek Middle Eastern schizophrenic furious alt-metal style had nothing to do with everyone else. I believe that nu metal had the strongest semiotic relationship with glam metal, not only because it sold more and attracted people outside of rock, but also because it was essentially a product of its time. Of course, where glam metal said, "Let's have a good time. Life is a party," nu metal offered misery, grumble, violence, and reaction for the sake of reaction. This was also evident from the events that occurred at Woodstock '99, rapes during Korn's set, and large-scale riots caused by the irresponsible behavior of Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit. Perhaps that was the beginning of the end for this genre as well, which wouldn't be long in coming. As the century turned, an unexpected opportunity was given to the average music lover through the then still relatively new platform of the internet. The ability to acquire and listen to music for free. Lars Ulrich and Metallica's efforts to curb and control this possibility will prove similar to trying to stop a torrent with a wooden plank in your hands. They would also cause a huge negative backlash for him and his band. However, without us knowing it, this new reality would change everything about how the world perceives and behaves in relation to music. We're not just talking about one genre dethroning another. Here we're talking about apocalypse-level changes, but more about all of that in the eras to come. No one can say exactly why nu metal fell. Perhaps it had simply run its course and had nothing new to offer. If there's one lesson to be learned from our story, it's that if something rises very high, it will also fall very abruptly. I think the way the old guard was treated by fans and the press had also changed. When Motley Crue released their book, The Dirt, in 2001, they showed everyone exactly what the 80s were like and reminded people how much fun the world was having back then. Somewhere along the line, this whole story of misery, constant teenage whining, dark lyrics and stories got a little too much. The last successful examples of the genre testified to its impending collapse. System of a Down's Toxicity was included simply because it didn't have solos, while Evanescence's Fallen had a clear gothic metal dimension in both sound and aesthetics. Of course, another lesson our story teaches us is that when something falls, something immediately takes its place. And at the time we're talking about, that something was metalcore, a genre born from the mix of 90s metallic hardcore, which in turn had originated from 80s crossover thrash, with Swedish-style melodic death metal, as well as some purely pop sensibilities inherited from nu metal. Pioneers of the genre include Earth Crisis and Integrity from the mid-90s, followed by Botch and Converge, with the legendary We Are the Romans and Jane Doe albums respectively, as well as Dillinger Escape Plan, with Calculating Infinity. This new genre quickly broke down into particular styles. We had the most progressive side, which was also given the name Mathcore, Dillinger Escape Plan, Converge, Burnt by the Sun, Candiria, Coalesce. Perhaps the most distant from metal side, the Screamo/post-hardcore one, Poison the Well, Hope's Fall, Under Oath. The deathcore side, Bleeding Through, The Red Chord, Animosity, Suicide Silence, Whitechapel. And finally, the side that was most influenced by melodic death metal and/or thrash, Shadows Fall, Trivium, All That Remains, Unearth, Kill Switch Engage, Heaven Shall Burn, As I Lay Dying, Bullet for My Valentine, etc. Clearly the most successful in terms of the metal audience. Now, some bands from the last category, along with some names that were even closer to groove/thrash metal, were given the umbrella term NWOAM, New Wave of American Metal. These names were Lamb of God, Chimera, Devil Driver, or The Returning Machine Head. I can't say that metalcore became the favorite genre of your typical metalhead, but it's undeniable that it was closer to the classic metal sound than nu metal. It peaked in the mid-2000s and logically showed a type of fatigue immediately afterward. Its presence certainly had a positive result that we need to acknowledge: the return of thrash metal. You see, thrash was a clear influence on a large part of metalcore, whose success sparked renewed public interest in it. Starting in 2004 with Exodus's Tempo of the Damned, the big comeback began. Bands started reuniting, bringing back members from their classic lineups, making amazing albums, touring the world, and headlining major festivals. The highlight of this revival is considered to be the joint European tour of the thrash metal Big Four as part of the Sonosphere Festival in the summer of 2010. Another characteristic of this comeback was the emergence of new retro thrash bands that copied the sound, image, lyrical themes, and even the album covers of the genre's golden age. The new scene, whose main representatives were Municipal Waste, Toxic Holocaust, Warbringer, Violator, Havoc, Dr. Living Dead, Gamma Bomb, Lich King, Evil, and Suicidal Angels were given the moniker New Wave of old-school thrash metal. Apparently, thrash wasn't the only thing that came back. We can say that the whole era was the era of the great return of heavy metal. Starting with the reunion of the classic lineup of Black Sabbath and their triumphant performances at the biggest rock festival of the time, we also had the return of Dickinson and Smith in Iron Maiden, as well as an excellent new album, Rob Halford's return to Judas Priest, the renewed popularity of Ronnie James Dio, the return of the Mob Rules era, Black Sabbath, under the name Heaven and Hell, as well as the formidable new albums of Accept and Saxon. And not only that, genres and artists that had emerged in the previous era were now enjoying worldwide acceptance in the heavy rock scene. For example, the huge success of Evanescence pulled the entire gothic/symphonic metal genre, and names like Nightwish, Lacuna Coil, and Within Temptation found themselves selling millions of records worldwide. Stoner rock slowly but steadily built upon the gains of the previous era and established itself in the consciousness of rock fans with the massive success of Queens of the Stone Age before they became alternative, and the global recognition of Clutch. In progressive metal, Opeth finally became a big name, while Meshuggah's groundbreaking nature was vindicated when Bleed was released in 2008, blowing the minds of all progressive fans and drum enthusiasts all over the world. Starting with this song, we also saw the emergence of a new subgenre of metal, namely djent, which basically consists of scores of talented young musicians trying to play like Meshuggah. Finally, Swedish melodic death metal continued its steady upward trajectory, gaining ever larger audiences and releasing very important albums. As for the other subgenres that were successful in the 90s, they were by no means left behind. Black metal continued its extremely creative path with the emergence of new styles and names. Death metal showed it still had a lot to offer outside of the melodic and core styles, and power metal, although not reaching the creative peaks of the previous period, remained a solid presence in the scene. Since we're talking about subgenres, we can't forget post-metal, which combined atmospheric, drawn-out metal riffs, unconventional songwriting, long song durations, sonic experimentation, and eclectic influences, becoming particularly popular in the middle of the period we're examining, with bands like Isis, Cult of Luna, Agalloch, Amenra, Neurosis, Pelican, Red Sparrows, Russian Circles, Minsk, and various others. Did all this frenetic activity mean that no new big names emerged on the scene? No, quite the opposite. Okay, in terms of numbers, we might not have had as many huge bands as in the 80s, but in terms of significance, things were different, with the emergence of two very important new names, Americans Mastodon and Gojira from France, as well as the gradual rise of a third that already existed, the Polish Behemoth. And all three of them, as their future paths would show, had come to stay. Just like the Danish band Volbeat, another big name that emerged during this era, and which I mention separately because although they can be very heavy at times, I must admit that they occasionally infuse their metal with various external influences, country, rockabilly, punk, alternative, to be placed alongside the previous three. Of course, while metal was busy reinventing itself, things in the music industry were gradually and inevitably changing toward what we experience today. The changes, if we look at them on a decade-by-decade basis, were simply in a dimension none of us had ever seen before. Just think, at the beginning of the decade, the internet was something new that we were still learning about. By the end, it was something we knew very well, everyone. At the beginning of the decade, downloading music for free from the internet was something only computer geeks and some hardcore music lovers knew how to do. By the end, it was something anyone could do. At the beginning of the decade, we downloaded albums song by song, which took us days. By the end, we were downloading entire discographies in a quarter of an hour. The scary thing is that throughout the period we're talking about, we heard from everyone how bad piracy and downloading free music are, that it wasn't right to do it, etc. While at the same time, what we were seeing unfold before our very eyes were developments that both facilitated the downloading process and simultaneously made it difficult to prevent it. Faster connections, larger and cheaper hard drives, blank CDs being sold by the kilo, file-sharing programs popping up like mushrooms, and finally, the arrival of torrents. And of course, while all this was happening, practically in essence, no one did anything. Large multinational companies didn't have a problem because they were playing on all fronts. They had their music subsidiaries, but they also manufactured hard drives, CDs, managed internet connections, etc. Those who paid the price were the small or medium-sized record labels and, of course, the musicians themselves, especially those of the newest bands, as we will see in the next era, where things would change in ways we couldn't even imagine or predict, where nothing would ever be the same again. For the triumph and the power, spoils of war. Let's start with the music first. During this era, a new retro genre was created, which practically adopted the forms and sonic choices of classic metal from the 82 to 83 period, whether we call it US power or new wave of British heavy metal, as if neither Pyromania nor Kill 'Em All had ever happened. The genre was named New Wave of Traditional Metal and included names like Cauldron, Crystal Viper, Enforcer, Eternal Champion, Grand Magus, Night Demon, Portrait, Skullfist, Traveler, Visigoth, White Wizard, Wolf, and many others. It may never have reached the popularity of metal's golden age, but it found its place and its audience, and even today it continues to give us new names: Lucifer, Demon Bitch, Tower, Mean Mistreater, Tyran, Crypt Sermon, Smolder, Venator, Bloodstar, and many others. Another genre that flourished during that era was definitely gent, perhaps the most popular new metal genre, with names like Periphery, Tesseract, Vola, Viljata, Animals as Leaders, Monuments, Sky Harbor, Textures, etc. One could say it was perhaps the last exciting, original, and groundbreaking metal genre to emerge, something new that didn't come as a subgenre of something else. Finally, in a development we might not have expected, one of the products of metalcore, deathcore, not only broke away from the original scene, but also found a popularity that no one anticipated, given the heaviness of the music. Various names started appearing at that time, such as Job for a Cowboy, initially, Fit for an Autopsy, The Acacia Strain, Humanity's Last Breath, Carnifex, The Contortionist, Born of Osiris, Within the Ruins, Chelsea Grin, Thy Art is Murder, Lorna Shore, etc. To all of this, we can add the blackened scene, in which we saw black metal vocals combined with established sonic forms like speed, thrash, or even classic heavy metal, and which began to make its presence felt during that era with names like Midnight, Kvelertak, Cruel Force, Skeleton Witch, Hell Ripper, Inculter, Death Hammer, Bewitcher, Whiskey Ritual, etc. We can also talk about the big names establishing themselves in the new thrash scene, mainly Vector and Power Trip, the new extreme sound in death metal, with the original ideas of Ulcerate, Portal, or Horrendous, as well as the great success of Origin and the Black Dahlia Murder. The new big names in black metal, Megwa, Batushka, or Mistherming, the rise of the Euro power scene, and the success of Dragon Force, Beast in Black, and Sabaton. We must also mention the new big names in progressive, such as Between the Buried and Me, Ni Obliviscaris, Leprous, The Ocean, Hearken, or Caligula's Horse. And of course, we had the emergence of the next and perhaps last new big name from the Swedish metal scene, Ghost, who, in just a few years, have rightfully, in my opinion, managed to headline arena tours around the world, playing in front of thousands of fans who absolutely adore them. The mainstream media's treatment and virtual acceptance of such an explicitly anti-religious and anti-Christian band without significant issues shows how the general public's perception of heavy metal has changed. The last thing I ought to mention is how, in the 16 years we examined in these two chapters, the position of women in metal changed completely. During its golden age, the women of metal were mostly beautiful presences in music videos and album covers, who sometimes became girlfriends or wives of the musicians and, of course, groupies. There were so few actual female musicians that someone who lived at the time could probably remember them by heart. Girl School, Joan Jett, Lita Ford, Doro, Vixen, Lee Aaron, Sabina Klassen, Dawn Crosby, Wendy O. Williams, The Great Cat are the names I remember. Searching on the internet, I also found lesser-known names like Rock Goddess, Anne Boleyn of Hellion, Mean Streak, Kate de Lombert of Acid, and that's it. Still, the names are far too few for these 11 years when heavy metal led the heavy rock world. This began to change in the 90s with the popularity of the gothic/symphonic metal frontwomen, as well as some significant presences in nu metal, Otep Shamaya, Kitty. But it was after 2000 that things really took off. Originally from Europe, with the global success of Nightwish, Lacuna Coil, Within Temptation, Epica, and the emergence of Angela Gossow as a world-renowned name. Then from America, obviously with Amy Lee of Evanescence, as well as Maria Brink of In This Moment, and Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm, and finally from Japan, with the rise of the huge Japanese female metal scene there. Distros, Bandmaid, Love Bites, Bride Ear, Nemophila, Fate Gear. Obviously, the great success of all the previous female artists led many girls to enter heavy metal in all genres and in all roles. Today, some of the biggest names in the rock world, from Tatiana Schmeiluk of Ginger to Courtney LaPlante of Spiritbox to Jennifer Haben of Beyond the Black, are women. And in my opinion, that's very good. If we put all of that together, we could say it was one of the richest and most exciting eras for heavy metal, one of the best times to be a fan of the sound. Isn't that right? Not exactly. You see, the reason I put this 5-year period as a distinct era is the developments outside of metal, developments that forever changed the relationship between listener and music. When YouTube came out in 2008, it was perhaps the final blow to the physical product and record sales. Very soon, you could hear any song ever released in that platform. If we add torrent sites, which were now known to everyone and allowed us to download any discography we wanted within minutes, things become even clearer. So, in the end, the music industry raised the white flag and surrendered with the launch of Spotify, the most popular music streaming platform, which was followed by others. All of this obviously created a new reality. Physical product sales hit lows we've never seen before, stripping musicians of their primary source of income. Now they were left with tours, festivals, or even cruises and everything that they entail, mainly merchandise, as well as royalties, which are the intellectual property rights from when a song is played publicly, television/radio, clubs, or restaurants. This new reality, if we look at it practically, had a completely different impact on bands depending on when they emerged. Everything was set up in favor of the old and the classic. They didn't need to release an album every 2 years. They had hundreds of songs that people loved. In the last decade, for example, Metallica and Iron Maiden each released 2 albums, even though they toured every year. The royalties are much higher for them, with so many classic songs continuously being played in public. If you're a new band, you don't have any of the above. You have to tread the whole world on tour, under much better conditions than in the past, to be honest, but with the vital need to do it non-stop. Practically, you have to do 2 or 3 times the work compared to before, knowing that you'll never achieve more than a potentially comfortable living from what you do, and that's not for everyone. Of course, and we have to concede this one, today it is much easier for a new band to become known and make their music available to literally all over the world. They can do it all by themselves, record the album, release it, distribute it, and collect the money from the sale of the physical product and/or individual streams. Now, for the dedicated music fan, there is also an upside to the new reality. They can easily find music and judge for themselves if they like it or not. So many databases exist, Metal Archives, Rate Your Music, Wikipedia, where someone can find anything about any artists that ever existed in a matter of seconds. Then he or she can listen to how that artist sounds and eventually immediately order some kind of physical product to be delivered to his or her house in a matter of days. Back in the day, since we could only listen to 1 or 2 songs from each record, if we were lucky, we had to trust the music journalists and critics, and that so many times created situation of clear conflict of interest. I cannot count the times that back in the day I saw an ad for an album on a magazine, only to read the review for that same album a few pages after. Everybody suspects how music labels paid record stations, especially in America, to play songs for certain artists. So this new reality is a mixed bag. Everyone can have their own opinion on whether or not they like the new situation regarding music. One thing is for sure, though. Nothing can change it. From a musical perspective, I would say that this latest era of metal has been particularly calm, without major upheavals. Practically, the artists and styles we mentioned in the previous chapter continued to release albums steadily, while many great artists of the past remained active with numerous tours and some rare new releases. Also, occasionally we had the appearance of some potential big hopes for the future, like Dogma, practically a female version of Ghost, with additionally an overtly sexual image, Castle Rat, a proto-doom psych metal band with intense theatricality in their videos and live shows, Italians Messa, a doom/gothic metal group with psychedelic flourishes and an excellent female voice, or Havakrunu, an epic pagan slash melodic black slash Viking metal band from Finland that continues the great tradition of the region in that style. These 9 years also saw the further establishment of the Euro power scene as a major player in the heavy metal universe, both in album sales and especially live shows. I am talking about bands like Sabaton, Powerwolf, Dragon Force, Beast in Black, and Amaranthi. I would say that their approach has frequently drawn high levels of criticism from various sources in the heavy metal realm, both journalists and fans, either for their formulaic approach to songwriting, the first three, or their overt pop sensibilities, the last two. In general, we cannot say that someone who wants to hear new heavy music today has any reason to complain. There's too much to choose from. But to be honest, no new genre has emerged in these recent years to shake things up, like, for example, Gent did in 2010. Someone could argue that after 55 years, there's nothing left to invent and discover. Everything has been tried and everything has already been played. That's not entirely accurate. New sounds are emerging, but what we're seeing a lot of in recent years is the emergence of what I call micro-genres, meaning very specific combinations of style, primarily originating from the avant-garde metal or the broader black metal scene, that are played and developed by a single band, and that's it. For example, I could mention the Scottish band Saur and their Celtic atmospheric black metal, the New Yorkers Imperial Triumphant, who incorporate elements of dissonant avant-prog and atonal jazz into their death black metal, the American band Wayfarer, who combine black metal with elements of gothic country and Americana, or Swiss band Zeal and Ardor, who somehow make their mix of avant-garde metal and spirituals sound almost natural. There are too many names and combinations to mention them all here. These three examples are just a very small sample. However, we should mention one big name that has emerged in recent years and whose peculiarities, in a way, justify what I said above. They are Blood Incantation from Denver, Colorado. Although they started as a fairly typical death metal band, in their last two albums, they managed to stand out with their particularly bold mix of classic death metal and prog krautrock. They managed to even get members of Tangerine Dream to play on their latest album, 2024's Absolute Elsewhere, which was critically acclaimed worldwide. The amazing thing about them is that they take what they do incredibly seriously, whether they're playing like Morbid Angel or like Eloy. It's not a gimmick to grab attention. They believe the same on both sides of their music. Also, taking into account the modern reality of the music business, I think that a reason that no new genres emerge, or that only micro-genres appear, is that the notion of the music genre is not necessary anymore. The reason music genres existed after all, especially in metal, was to have an idea about how something sounded before we gave our precious money to buy it. Even the section of the record store where an album was placed was crucial. That influenced how the musicians thought and played. Today, none of this is imperative, as the listener and potential buyer can listen for him or herself how exactly everything sounds. Now, to be totally honest with you, I would say that I cheated a bit earlier when I said that no new musical style emerged during this ninth era of heavy metal. We just need to approach that one with a little caution. You see, just when we thought metalcore was completely finished, it began being talked about again. Starting in 2010, with Bring Me the Horizon's sudden sonic shift. A style began to crystallize which, at the time we are now, has reached the top in terms of the new heavy rock sound. This new style incorporates elements from old metalcore, from modern metal subgenres like gent or deathcore, but also from non-metal scenes like electronic/dubstep, combined with a much clearer pop influence compared to the old scene. This new idiom is often referred to as modern metalcore, and we can confidently say that if the original metalcore scene wasn't liked by the purists once, this one isn't liked 100 times. This, of course, is of no concern to the bands themselves, who have become immensely popular in recent years. Besides Bring Me the Horizon, who pioneered the whole style, I'm referring to bands like Spiritbox, Sleep Token, Poppy, Asking Alexandria, While She Sleeps, Bad Omens, Counterparts, Ginger, Code Orange, Electric Callboy, as well as names that have changed their style over time to approach this sound, such as Architects or Veil of Maya, who both started as gent, or Parkway Drive, who started as classic metalcore. Arguably the hottest name in the global heavy rock scene right now, Knocked Loose, from Louisville, Kentucky, also belongs to this genre. If someone tells me in the comments that this is not metal, I can definitely see their point. But as someone who just reports on developments, I couldn't pretend that these bands do not exist. Even more so, that they seem to attract younger audiences, something that metal desperately needs. Only time will tell if this style will be the future of heavy rock, inevitably changing the skin of heavy metal as we know it, or if new and more traditional bands will surface, attain a sufficient level of success, and save the essence of the style.
Build a fire, 1,000.
So, we've reached the end of our story, of the great story of heavy metal. Despite the questions and uncertainties about the future, we can't help but marvel at how this musical style has persisted for so many years, standing strong through so many ups and downs, to the point where it is now an integral part of the world's musical heritage. Even though the critics never liked it, and still don't, despite being ridiculed, disparaged, and accused of so many things, it continues to live on. And for now, it's healthy. And that's because it always had something that rarely appeared to such an extreme and absolute degree, namely, the love and devotion of its fans, who, no matter how old they got, how grey their hair became, or whether they became fathers or even grandfathers, will always love it and give it a significant place in their lives. So, after more than 55 years of existence, thousands of bands, records, songs, and live shows, I think we can all agree that there is not another music genre quite like heavy metal. To the next 55 years.